Custom GNOME login options. Let's take a quick look at a couple of customizations you can make to the GNOME login screen. To do so, let's open the Login Window Preferences tool with the sudo gdm setup command. Let's examine the Local tab. The options are fairly simple. The available screens, other than the default welcome theme, depend in part on the installed desktop environments. For example, additional options would be available if I had the KDE or XFCE desktops installed on this system. I can also customize what's shown in the menu, and a little bit lower in this screen, though it's not shown here, I can also customize the welcome message, useful for specific organizations. Next, select the Remote tab. If this is the first time you've opened the Login Window Preferences, you might note that remote logins are disabled by default. But if you enable a style, it can be set to the same as local or plain with Face Browser. So let's see how this works. Let's go to a regular display manager and open the login menu. I can do that by clicking Options or pressing F10. I select Remote Login via XDMCP, which stands for the X Display Manager Control Protocol. It takes a moment to search your network for other systems which allow remote logins. I see one here. I select that host. And I click Connect. The speed with which it connects depends on the speed of your network. After a few seconds, I see a different sort of login screen. What you see here is the quote-unquote plain screen with Face Browser. Yes, it says Debian, but don't be concerned. It still logs into an Ubuntu system, and remember, Ubuntu is based on Debian Linux. Xserver configuration commands. There are several basic ways to configure the Xserver from the command line interface, but whatever you do, back up the current Xserver configuration file first. That configuration file is etc/x11/xorg.conf. The simplest way to back it up is to back it up to your home directory, as shown here. Yes, if you run the sudo etc/gdm/failsafe-dexconf script, that script creates a failsafe Xserver configuration file in the etc/x11/xorg.conf.failsafe file. And that would get you to a GUI if your xorg.conf file is messed up. But it's best if you have a backup, as that backup would contain your custom configuration for any specialty video cards and monitors. If you're familiar with other Linux distributions, you may know the xorg.conf file in detail. You could create it directly from the command line, but such detailed configuration options are beyond the scope of the UCP curriculum. Other Linux distributions also have other tools, such as xf86config for the old x386 server, and then xorg-config for the current x.org server. To run similar configuration commands on an Ubuntu system, run the sudo dpackage-reconfigure-plow xserver-xorg command. The -p low prompts for low level, in other words, more detailed questions. If you'd rather run the command with fewer questions, substitute high for low. Let me run through this real quickly. I'll leave the reading of these options to your own testing. I just accept the defaults. Sometimes you have to use the tab key to activate the OK option. And there, it creates a new xorg.conf file and also creates a backup named after the day and time of the change. If the new server configuration doesn't work, you can restore the original configuration by restoring from your backup or the backup created here. One more option is based on the xorg-configure command, but that only works in run level 1, which can be started with the sudo init1 command, or by booting into recovery mode, which essentially does the same thing. Once you see this recovery menu, you select this drop to root shell prompt option, and then you can run the xorg-configure command. But be aware, this option doesn't work in a Ubuntu Linux server system configured in a VMware server, at least not currently. Screen resolution and refresh rates. Screen resolution is the detail associated with a graphical user interface, expressed in units known as pixels, which is short for picture elements. The more pixels you have configured, the more detail that is available on the screen. Refresh rates can help handle changes in a picture when type appears or when figures move across a screen. Both elements depend on two hardware components: the graphics card in the computer and the monitor. In this video, we'll use a GUI to modify the X-server configuration. Just remember, before making any changes, back up the current X-server configuration file, etc/x11/xorg.conf. This command here, with the tilde at the end, backs up that file to my home directory. Now let's open that tool with the display config-gtk command. It opens the Screen and Graphics Preferences tool. Note how multiple monitors can be configured. If they were attached to this system, they would appear in this pane here. If there were a second monitor, it would be shown as Screen 2, a third monitor as Screen 3, and so on. Note the location drop-down text box, which would have different locations if you chose to save the current configuration with names such as laptop on the road or laptop in docking station. Note the two different tabs. First, the Screen tab supports the configuration of the monitor. It's currently configured as a plug-and-play monitor, or you can select a manufacturer and model. You can even configure a widescreen monitor or attempt auto detection. A wide variety of resolution settings are available, including some well suited for widescreen monitors. Note there are different refresh rates available as well, expressed in Hertz. In this tab, we can also configure the relative positions of multiple displays if more than one screen was shown here. As you can see, grayed out, there's options for secondary screens, as well as how systems are configured between the screens. Next, there's the Graphics Card tab, where you can configure a specialty driver. As shown here, you can select a driver by manufacturer and model of the graphics card, or you can select one of the pre-configured drivers available here. If you're unsure about the driver, a couple of generic options are VGA and Visa. VESA, not the credit card. These options are most likely to work with most current graphics cards. However, they may not include all the capabilities of your graphics card. Let me exit out of here. As suggested by the video memory option, certain drivers, not this one, support different levels of video memory. Changes that you make, if you clicked OK, would be saved to the xorg.conf configuration file. Of course, you can test the changes, but they aren't implemented for all users until the next time the X server is started, which would require all users to log off the current system. Next, there is the Monitor Resolution tool, which you can start with the GNOME Display Properties command. As you can see, it opens the Monitor Resolution Settings window, and it supports the configuration of screen resolution, if the screen resolution is supported, you'll be able to choose from different refresh rates, as well as a rotation, which can help you work with systems such as tablets. While the parameters of this tool are limited by the xorg.conf configuration file, any settings that you create with this tool are saved in a .gconf subdirectory of the user's home directory. Font configuration files and commands. Fonts, at least the fonts you choose, are as subjective as art. However, the UCP curriculum does suggest that you need to understand the basics of fonts, including the installation of newer fonts. Implicitly, fonts in Ubuntu Linux are based on the English language, at least those fonts discussed in the UCP curriculum. However, packages and tools associated with changing fonts apply to all languages. To modify fonts, you'll need the right packages, which can be installed with a command such as sudo apt-get install fontconfig fontconfig-config. As you can see, I've already installed these packages. Adding new fonts is easy if you know the applicable packages. For example, I often have to install Microsoft fonts, as that's what's demanded by my clients. To do so in Ubuntu Linux, I run a command such as sudo apt-get install mstt core fonts, and so on. Be aware, these packages are currently stored in the Multiverse repository, so if this command leads to trouble, you may need to enable that repository. To configure or reconfigure fonts, I often start by running the following command. sudo dpackage-reconfigure-p low for low level of detail font config-config. Note, even when configuring low level details, they'll run into just 3 questions here. The first question suggests the use of native fonts. While the note applies to Debian and Microsoft fonts, this also applies to Ubuntu Linux as a Debian derivative. So I select native, select OK, press enter. The second question is associated with what's called sub-pixel rendering, suitable for LCD screens such as laptops and flat screens. I choose automatic as I sometimes connect to an older cathode ray tube monitor. The third step is associated with bitmap fonts, which generally should not be enabled due to the quality, but are sometimes necessary. Any changes made to this setting are implemented the next time the X server is started. Font configuration files are stored in the etc/fonts directory. If you read through some of these files, you'll see references to files in the user/share/fonts directory, as well as user-specific font files in user home directories. Like other user configuration files, they're hidden, so they start with a dot, and they'll have names like .fonts.conf and .fonts. One more way to customize the look and feel of fonts is with the Appearance Preferences tool, which you can start with the GNOME Appearance Properties command. Once it's open, we go to the Fonts tab and quickly examine the options for different situations in the GUI, for applications, for documents, for the desktop, and so on. There are different rendering options which affect the look and feel of fonts in the GUI. The GNOME Display Manager. The GNOME Display Manager is the graphical login program, as shown here. The basic version of this program supports basic login, shutdown, and reboot commands, even hibernate if so enabled by the hardware, and a bit more. To open this menu, either click Options or F10. You can also select the language from among those that are installed and configured, the session if you want to log into a desktop environment other than GNOME. It also supports remote logins, as I discuss in another video. The GNOME Display Manager can be customized with the Login Window Preferences tool. You can start it with the sudo gdm setup command. It opens the Login Window Preferences tool with 6 different tabs. The General tab can help customize the look of the clock if it appears, and the default login. The Local tab can help customize not just the look and feel of the login screen, but the availability of the Actions menu, as shown here. The Remote tab supports remote access to the local GDM login screen, an excellent option for terminal services. The Accessibility tab supports login customization. The Security tab allows you to customize login options, including a possible login by the root administrative user if you so dare. The Users tab supports lists of authorized users in the login screen if so configured. Any changes made with this tool are made to files in the etc/gdm directory, while the main GNOME Display Manager configuration file is gdm.conf. Changes are actually made to gdm.conf-custom.